Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti-Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paschatyadesatarine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. I'm not very much qualified to sit before you this morning or at any time to discuss high philosophy. If I have only one qualification, it is that somehow or other Krishna has allowed me to live to an old age, to remember and broadcast the glories of my beloved Srila Prabhupada. A.C. Bhakti-Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much, Srila Prabhupada. I had the great good fortune to spend more than 7 years at his feet and by his side. And now I've tried to bring you the stories of his greatness in these books. I know it's a Bhagavatam class, but I'm not very good at speaking Sanskrit. I'll start out by giving the Srila Prabhupada's English translation of today's verse. It is from Canto 9, Chapter 14, Text 47. By means of that fire, Pururava, who desired to go to the planet where Urvasi resided, performed a sacrifice by which he satisfied the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, the enjoyer of the results of sacrifice. And thus he worshipped the Lord, who is beyond the perception of the senses and is the reservoir of all the demigods. I'll just summarize quickly Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse in a few simple words. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, Lord Krishna, is the enjoyer of all sacrifices. We, the individual personalities, are to be enjoyed by Krishna. This is our eternal relationship with God. He is the enjoyer, and we are the enjoyed. As living entities, by nature, we must act. And the path of action recommended in this verse, in order to achieve our blissful union or reunion with Krishna, is sacrifice, tapasya, or what Srila Prabhupada described to a small group of us young Westerners 53 years ago in America, what he called devotional service. Sacrifice is a kind of a harsh word, so devotional service is better. In 1967, Srila Prabhupada revealed to us Krishna's own words in Bhagavad-Gita, Lord Krishna's instructions to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He told us, and we could see for ourselves, as this was a summary and compendium of all knowledge, Bhagavad-Gita. At the onset of Bhagavad-Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna, "What do I do? How do I act?" And Krishna replies, "Just act for me. Strive for me with your fullest energy, and take the biggest risks for me. The battlefield. Win or lose, live or die. Take the biggest risks for me, but win or lose, it doesn't matter. I will protect you." So in other words, as Srila Prabhupada put it, chase the rhino. I based my books on that very phrase. I'll just read it to you again, because this was Prabhupada's marching orders for us young devotees, how to perform devotional service. We should always be enthusiastic to try for capturing the rhinoceros. That way, if we fail, everyone will say, "Never mind, nobody can catch a rhinoceros anyway." And if we succeed, then everyone will say, "Just see what a wonderful thing they have done." This is Prabhupada's definition of devotional service. The Swamiji explained to us that Krishna most appreciates devotees who risk the most on his behalf. And if you risk everything for Krishna, he must personally intervene to remove obstacles to your risky service. Dare to pursue the biggest goals for Krishna. And this was the spirit and the subject and object of all of our activities. Chasing the rhino became the hue and cry of the first generation of the Swami's starstruck disciples. He said two things. You become yourself Krishna conscious, and you spread Krishna consciousness. That's it. Very simple. Moreover, you become Krishna conscious by spreading Krishna consciousness. This is the secret. It's a 2-for-1 deal. 2 for the price of 1. Chase the rhino for Krishna, become Krishna conscious. Very simple. In those early days, we had no models, no history, no maps, no books of instructions, no well-marked trails. We had only the Swami, his words, his personal example, how he had chased the rhino to America as an old man with no money, friends, and no plan really, under Krishna's protection. We saw his photos standing with Indian heads of state, and we saw copies of his letters to popes and presidents. He never minced words. Each day he said to us, "What I am telling you will save humankind. You must help me change the world." He said that every day. And most of you know the story, how all that happened, how the Swami captured a few of us, and how in such a short time the Hare Krishna culture exploded around the world. Especially if you've read Volume 1, Chasing Rhinos. How many have read Volume 1? Oh, quite a few. All right. But do you know the real story of Srila Prabhupada in India? How it happened? How the Swami came to this country and what he did in 2 years' time. Here it is. This is Volume 2 of Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. It's the India story. I was an eyewitness to the rebirth of the Hare Krishna movement in this ancient land of Krishna's birth. From the moment we landed in Bombay in early October 1970, and for the next 2 years, this book describes how Srila Prabhupada created the powerful presence of Krishna consciousness that you see around you here today. The themes, I guess if you had to put some themes to this book, or some purposes or messages, they can be broken down into about 3 basic messages. First of all, Srila Prabhupada as the Commander-in-Chief. In America and Europe, Srila Prabhupada was there advising us, but as young boys and girls, we did everything. We rented the places, the temples, we built everything. We figured out how to spread his message on our own pretty much, because we knew how to do things in America, under Prabhupada's advice, of course. But here in India, it was totally different. We didn't know how to do anything. Srila Prabhupada took command the first day in India. He taught us how to eat, how to sleep, how to dress, how to act, what to do, how to open a bank account, everything. Srila Prabhupada had to do everything. He gave us remedies for our little illnesses. At every moment, we just looked at Prabhupada like our father. Father, you have to help us do this. We don't know how to do anything here. So that's one point. Another point was to understand Srila Prabhupada's perfect historical timing to come back to India. You were a new nation, only 20 years old at that time. And so the rebirth of India as a national entity was parallel to Srila Prabhupada's entry into India for the rebirth of Krishna consciousness. And this may be the most important message from Volume 2. In 1970, in India, Krishna was gone. There was no Krishna here, nearly extinct. Now, as you see, in less than 50 years, Krishna is everywhere. He's the most famous god in India. So in Volume 2, you can read and be amazed how he did it. In a 15-month period, a total time of 15 months, Srila Prabhupada personally, single-handedly, dug deep into the Indian soil and planted this mighty tree of Krishna consciousness that you see today. A few months shy of 50 years ago, in October 1970, Srila Prabhupada arrived in Bombay. And he had sent letters to 20 of us in different parts of America. There was no emails, no cell phones, nothing like that. We got letters in the mail, Prabhupada simply saying, "Join me in India." Somehow or other, we all came and arrived here. There was no plan. And the reason and the purpose of Srila Prabhupada's mission here became clear. He stated most clearly, and I found a purport in one of the verses in 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that illustrates this perfectly. This is Prabhupada's purport. For the past 2,000 years, India has been subjected by the rule of foreigners, and the legs of progress have been broken. In the Western countries, the eyes of the people have become blind due to the dazzling glitter of material opulence. The blind man of the Western countries and the lame man of India should combine together in this Krishna consciousness movement. Then the lame man of India can walk with the help of the Westerner, and the blind Westerner can see with the help of the lame man. In short, the material advancement of the Western countries and the spiritual assets of India should combine for the elevation of all human society. So this partnership, the lame man, India, and the blind man, America and Europe, to create this partnership was and is Srila Prabhupada's mission for India. It's important for you to imagine now what it was like, this scene in October 1970 in Bombay. After 200 years of colonial rule, the British had just left India only 23 years before we arrived. And after 1,500 years of foreign domination, you, India, are a new country. Your government and your economy are struggling to figure out how to manage yourselves, how to survive, how to stabilize in this new global age. 1970 was an experimental time here. There was capitalism on one side, communism, nationalism, socialism. The Indian government and economy were struggling to find a system. Inward looking, not much global reach yet. In fact, Srila Prabhupada was the first Indian person I'd ever seen in my life. So think about this perfect historical window. India is young, only 20 years old. The birth of your new nation of India is also the birth of the Krishna consciousness movement in India. Perfect historical window. So into this land struggling with new birth comes one old man, 74 years, and 20 foreign, inexperienced youngsters. We came here on one-way tickets. We had no money in our pockets. We were suddenly dropped into this very strange and exotic land. Our idea of India in those days was pictures we'd seen in magazines of, these guys with towels wrapped around their heads with a flute in their mouth, charming a cobra coming out of a basket. Or some yogi manifesting a rope into the sky and climbing up the rope into the clouds. That was India in our minds when we came. But Srila Prabhupada called us here, as I said, by letters. There was a total uncertainty what we would do here. We didn't even know each other, these 20 young people. I knew Gurdas and Jamuna and Malati, of course, but people like Tamal Krishna and Giriraj and others I'd never met before. So we were all strangers to each other. But we had our common father, the commander-in-chief. We were his little army, and Srila Prabhupada had to do everything. And he organized us with this ancient system of integrated knowledge that bound us together tight in certain rules of action. And what Srila Prabhupada said to do, we did, and applied our American ways to doing things in India. At our first big public meeting in October 1970 on Chowpatty Beach in Bombay, which is just a few blocks from the current Radha Gopinath temple there. It was called Bharatiya Sadhu Samaj. It was a huge program. All the yogis and spiritual leaders, Hindu leaders of India were there for a 10-day conference to talk about their system of spiritual yoga. Bharatiya Sadhu Samaj, all the sadhus of India, the naked Naga Babas all the way up to the big Swamis. And Prabhupada came on the stage and he said, "So these, my disciples, practically millions of people in Western countries are chanting Hare Krishna and taking up this, your Indian spiritual culture. Now you have forgotten. You want to be like them, after money and motor cars. In 1,000 years you cannot have motor cars like they have got. Now they want Krishna, that is all. They want your spiritual treasure house, which you have neglected. This is your wealth, Bhagavad-Gita, why you do not give." So this idea, this was sensational news for the people of India. The West wants our spiritual treasure. This was revolutionary. And that night, Prabhupada called us to his room and he told us that in Indian tradition, that if a Maharaja marries an English wife, that they call her his white elephant. So Prabhupada looked at us with those huge eyes and he said, "Now you are my dancing white elephants." So we hit the streets. We started doing Sankirtan all over the place, and Srila Prabhupada saw the huge response in Bombay and decided to make Bombay his headquarters in India. We were a total sensation. Every newspaper, front page of every newspaper had headlines about the Hare Krishnas in town. The newspapers, the magazines, the film magazines. It was sensational. We became the talk of Bombay. Little Saraswati, my 2-year-old daughter, she would stand up on a stage with 10,000 people out there and say, "Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead." And the whole town loved her. So from Bombay, Prabhupada's fame began to spread out across the nation. But after 1 week of this kind of Sankirtan, Prabhupada first called us there to India. He said, I want you to join me there for my World Sankirtan Party. That was the only plan we had. It was going to be called World Sankirtan Party. But after 1 week on the streets of doing Sankirtan, Prabhupada called us to him and he said, we must stop this Sankirtan on the streets. Here in India, they will think you are only beggars. And he introduced this life member program then. It was a great idea. We go and approach the leaders of India, enroll them as a member, a life member. And for 1,111 rupees, they got to become a life member of ISKCON. It's a lot of money in those days, probably like 1 lakh of rupees today. So we had to go to the elite, wealthy class. And we did what Americans do best, business and sales. We hit the offices of every big man in Bombay. We would go in pairs, a good guy and a bad guy. I was teamed up with a boy named Rishi Kumar from Brooklyn, tough New Yorker. We promised them the moon. We would go in. Whether the door was locked or open, what didn't matter, we barged in. And my friend Rishi would bang on the desk and say, you must become life member. And I would have to apologize and say, dear sir, please forgive my god brother. He's only following the instructions of his spiritual master. But 99% of the time, the guy would sign and write us a check. We would promise them all the books that Prabhupada ever wrote. We promised them that wherever they went around the world, they could stay in one of our temples free of charge. The truth of the matter was we had no books. We had 1 or 2 personal copies, that was it. This was a young movement still. And out of maybe a dozen temples in the world, you would be lucky to find a space on the floor and one of them to sleep. But we promised them the moon. This was Prabhupada. He was always looking far ahead. And he taught us to act like this. Have no fear. Go for it. Nothing is impossible. Chase the rhinoceros. And when we first arrived in India, we expected to see Krishna everywhere. But we couldn't find him. No pictures, where are the Vaishnavas we expected? Hanuman was many places. Shiva was everywhere. We saw Ganesh here and there on the little taxi cabs. They had Ganesh on the dashboard. And there was this one lady with 8 arms with skulls around her neck. She seemed to be a lot of places. But we couldn't find Krishna. It's very important that you understand from your own present experience, from this perspective surrounded by Krishna, to appreciate what Srila Prabhupada has accomplished. Now Krishna is everywhere. Krishna Palace Hotel, Krishna Bicycle Shop, Krishna Sweet Shop. Krishna's name is everywhere in this country. Every town and village, Krishna is popular. Anyway, from Bombay we went quickly to places like Amritsar, Indore, Surat, and then to a 1-month encampment at Kumbh Mela in Allahabad. Probably everyone knows what is Kumbh Mela. It's the largest peaceful gathering of people on the planet. Millions of people come to Kumbh Mela for spiritual purposes. And we built a tent there, a big pandal, and camped for 1 month. And the Krishna people were the most popular place, and out of millions, everyone wanted to come and see this new Swami with his Krishna people, the main attraction for millions. And one thing we Americans knew how to do was put on a show. We had seen some big pandal shows here and there around, so we decided to have one ourselves. And we set up this show in Cross Maidan in Bombay, in the center of town. And in that 1 week, 10-day period, over 1 million people came to see Srila Prabhupada. It was a national sensation. And they fell in love with Srila Prabhupada and his merry pranksters. There were no Indian devotees were coming much for the first 6 months. It was a culture shock on both sides. It was a shock for us to be in this exotic land, and I assume for the Indian people it was a shock for them to see us. They wanted to see, wow, what is this? They wanted to understand it a bit before they started committing. But gradually, Indian youth also began to see that we were the real thing. There was one Parsi boy first, the first Indian devotee. He became Mahamsadas. And then at Krasnaidan, a young Indian student named Raghunath Patil joined us, and he became Lokanath Swami. And then in June 1971, the best thing that ever happened to me, Srila Prabhupada appointed me as his personal secretary. I got to live with him 24 hours a day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And that was the most exciting adventure of my life. The first place we went as Prabhupada's secretary was Russia, Moscow. It's hard for you to imagine nowadays what it was like in the world then. There was communism on one side, capitalism on the other, and an iron curtain between. Nobody could go over that iron curtain. It was impossible. But Prabhupada had been saying for years, I want to go to Russia. These people are more entrapped in Maya than any place on the planet. I must go and rescue them. After many years of trying, somehow or other, I got us a visa to go to Moscow. 5 days. It was a package deal. We got the hotel, food, and sightseeing tours to see the glories of the Soviet Empire. First day we arrived, we had no plan then. We didn't know what would happen there. 5 days in Moscow. The first day we arrived up in the hotel room, I think the 4th floor of the National Hotel, we heard noise in the street. It was a Sunday. And Prabhupada, we looked out, and it was a military parade. Thousands of soldiers goose-stepping in formation, tanks, artilleries going by, and big rockets as long as this temple on 4 lorries. Like that. For 2 hours, this parade went by. Prabhupada sat at the window and watched the whole thing. And when it was over, he turned to me, and there was a tear in his eye, and he said, "You cannot rule a people by fear. Within 20 years, all of this will be gone." I'll just read a little passage from the book. The second day, third day we were there, I went to the bank to change some dollars into rubles. I figured we better have some cash. And a young boy stopped me on the street before I entered the bank, and he said in English, he said, "Would you like to change some money?" The last couple of days since we'd been there, I'd been seeing these same 2 guys following me everywhere. So I knew the KGB was really watching us. So I said to him, "No, I better not. Thank you very much." And he said, "But wait a minute, do you have some jeans?" I said, "No, I'm dressed in dhoti. I don't wear jeans." "Oh," I said, "Do you have any Beatles records?" I said, "No, but the spiritual master for the Beatles is upstairs in that hotel room. Do you want to meet him?" So I took this boy, his name was Anatoly, up to see Srila Prabhupada. And the most amazing exhibition of Srila Prabhupada's spiritual mystic powers was displayed in that 3-day period. He took this young boy who knew nothing and made him into a pure devotee in 3 days' time, directly sitting there. Just transferred everything to this boy's brain. He taught him all the Vedas. He taught him chanting of Krishna. He taught him the entire philosophy. He taught him how to cook, how to dress, the customs and traditions of Vaishnavism. All of this in 3 days' time. Wonderful sight to behold. Anatoli was initiated eventually as Ananta Shanti Das. And from this tiny beginning, and despite jails, asylums, torture, even government-sponsored killings suffered by those he brought to Krishna consciousness, Ananta Shanti single-handedly created an underground cadre of Hare Krishna devotees that gradually spread throughout the USSR. By the late 1970s, the KGB had set up a special directorate just to quash the Krishna movement. But the Soviet Empire collapsed almost exactly 20 years after Prabhupada's brief visit, as he predicted it would. Prabhupada never returned to Russia. He didn't have to. For him, 5 days was enough to radically change the consciousness of a great nation, and I was the witness. How many people sitting out here are from the former Iron Curtain countries, or Russia, or Ukraine, or some place like that? Well, not too many today, but I've been meeting nothing but Russian and Ukrainian people for the last few weeks. Now, if you read this 5 days that changed the world, you can better understand it. So from Moscow, we went to Paris, and San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and New York, and then back to London. And then in September 1971, we went to Africa. Prabhupada always liked to go to new and challenging places. The night before a couple of nights before we left London, Prabhupada said to me, "You know, I have all these invitations. We have invitations from Australia, from New York, from Los Angeles, Tokyo, all these places he named off, and then I have just received an invitation from Nairobi. Where do you think we should go next?" I said, "Well, Prabhupada, you've never been to Africa." He says, "I was thinking the same thing. Make arrangements." So I got to see for 6 weeks Srila Prabhupada in the wilderness, how he did it, how he never broke stride and conquered the dark continent. And then we come back to India, 1971, October. In this next 6-month period in India, you'll read about the most powerful display of Prabhupada ever over the next 6 months, from October 71 to end of March 1972. First, there was the Calcutta Pandal in Deshapriya Park. 15,000 people at night came there for 10 nights. And then the New Delhi Pandal, Connaught Circus. It was like hitting the bullseye of India, Connaught Circus, LIC grounds. You must know where that is, center of Delhi. This was a very powerful time because India was on the verge of war with Pakistan. And all the political leaders of India, the mayor of Delhi, the minister of defense, the minister of finance, big scientists, big educators, came to introduce Prabhupada each night at the Pandal program for 10 nights. And he was at his strongest discussing politics and how to combine spiritual life with ruling a nation, with the administrative parts of ruling a nation. You can read yourself these stories. He dazzled the political leaders of India. And through him, he made a deep impact on the spiritual priorities and policies of this nation, a lasting impact. It's ironic because he had left Delhi 5 years before as a penniless beggar. He used to tell us stories how he would transport the paper. He would walk the paper across Delhi for his Bhagavatam because he didn't have whatever it was, 50 annas for a bus fare. He had nothing, but he started in Delhi. he concocted the Bhagavatam and produced it there. And he spent months and months in Delhi preparing to come to America. And now he returns 5 years later as the leader of the most prominent Indian spiritual group on the planet. He was a hero, a big hero of Delhi. And after 2 weeks in Delhi, then Srila Prabhupada brought us here to Vrindavan. 49 years ago, on November 26, 1971, Srila Prabhupada brought a busload of us, his Western disciples, to Vrindavan. The first time. Of course, we've been hearing for 3-4 years all about Vrindavan. This is the place of Krishna's birth and his pastimes. So I'll read something to tell you a little bit what happened a couple days later. This is in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada is in a negotiating mood. He returns to his room at Saraf Bhavan, and while his disciples continue sightseeing around Vrindavan, Prabhupada greets a parade of officials, godbrothers, and elevated Brajvasis, such as Krishnadas Babaji and Gaurachand Goswami. In master salesman mode, Swamiji narrates to them his accomplishments in the West and asks the assembled luminaries for one thing only: land. Mr. Kashiram Saraf and his wife Gitabai tell Prabhupada that they have an empty 4-acre property in Ramanreti and that they're considering donating it to a deserving spiritual group. Ramanreti means charming sands, and it's the place where Krishna used to play with his cowherd friends. It sounds great, so we go look at it. Saraf Bhavan is across from the main post office in the center of Vrindavan, and the Ramanreti land is about 1.5 miles away, out in rice paddies and undeveloped forest at the junction of Chatikara Road and the Parikrama Path. It's nice land, Gurudas and I agree, but Prabhupada, it's so far from town, and these people walk everywhere. Who will come all the way out here? Nonetheless, Prabhupada likes this land and expresses his interest in it, but the offer is not firm, and Prabhupada doesn't want to seem over-anxious. In Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada is more relaxed and intimate than I have ever seen him, greeting and preaching and maybe bragging a bit to his old friends in his quarters or on the street, during meals and massages. Yak, yak, yak in the pleasant winter sun. He is so elegant, graceful, friendly, carefree, wise, practical, and self-confident during this exhibition to his extended family in Vrindavan. Here he is the old friend, the favorite uncle, the patriarch, the worshipable village elder. We have never seen this side of him, but we quickly understand it. Vrindavan dwellers are grounded in magic. They are accustomed to the miraculous, and they see Prabhupada and his disciples as the recurrence of an ancient sacred pastime. Prabhupada charms, he cajoles, he argues from logic. It has been a natural progression for him, from native son to the first worldwide preacher of Vaishnavism. The historic success of his mission is visible, and Vrindavan must make room for him. There is a lingering atmosphere of reserve and suspicion among the caste Goswamis in Vrindavan, maybe a tinge of envy. We have been content here for 5,000 years. Our forefathers own this land and culture. Are these followers of yours genuine? Do they qualify to settle down among us? Look how they wander around like loose gorillas. Will they raise holy hell here? After 2 or 3 days, the obvious devotional demeanor of these fresh overseas Krishna devotees, plus Srila Prabhupada's keen arguments and diplomacy, wins out. And on the evening of November 29th, 1971, Vrindavan's mayor, the city officials, and the priests from the main temples gathered to salute Srila Prabhupada in a very moving public ceremony. Mayor Vishvambar Goswami, head Sevite of the Radha Ramana temple, delivers an address of welcome to the most exalted, unlimitedly decorated Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Ji Maharaj. So those were the first days in Vrindavan. It was less than a week, Srila Prabhupada planted the seeds here. And then on to Bombay. December 1971, Srila Prabhupada negotiated with a man named Mr. Nair for nearly 5 acres of prime land in Juhu. And then on to Jaipur, guests for a month of the Maharani of Jaipur, Govindaji's temple there. Madras, Visakhapatnam, then Calcutta, then on to Mayapur. Now Mayapur, after years, 2 or 3 years of struggling, it was still not much. Prabhupada wanted something big to happen in Mayapur, but the conditions there were very difficult. Finally, after some years of trying, they got 3 or 4 little acres of ground. They built one little hut and a little fence. Guru Kripa remembers those days. He was there. He was there during a flood. I guess it was probably the summer of 1971 when the Ganga came down and flooded the land 10 feet deep. Guru Kripa has told me the story that he and another devotee stayed behind to guard the premises. All the other devotees fled before the flood. And they had to stay in the rafters of the one hut we had there, bamboo rafters, in the dark. They had to sleep up there. And one morning, the first light came in, they could see across from them there was a giant python snake, about 10 feet long, wrapped around the rafter with them. So they had to come to an understanding. We'll leave you alone if you leave me alone. So this is how those devotees were struggling. For days they stayed there. They had to dive down through the water, come out through the door, and go on the roof all day to wait for rescue. 3 days they stayed there. It's just an example of how the devotees at Mayapur had struggled so much. But Prabhupada forced them to carry on, and he went there in February 1971, and within a few days he laid the cornerstone for the Mayapur temple that you see today. Meanwhile, he got a phone call, or maybe it was a telegram, I think it was a telegram from Chirodakshai here in Vrindavan, saying, come to Vrindavan, Sarafs have given you the land. We heard the story later that the Saraf, Mr. and Mrs. Saraf, who owned this land, couldn't decide which spiritual group to give this land to. So one day they asked Chirodakshai to come to their house, and they found a little pot, and they put 2 pieces of paper in the pot. One said yes, and one said no. And they put the pot in front of the deity of Radha and Krishna. And they said, Chirodakshai, now you reach your hand and pull out 1 piece of paper. Depending on the answer, we will give you the land or not. So, of course, the answer was yes. So Prabhupada rushed from Mayapur. He laid the cornerstone there on February 29th, 1972. And then March 10th, he was here, just 10 days later. And if you're a Vrindavan lover, I think you are, we all are, I think you'll really enjoy reading the full story here. I call it's such an exciting 3 days that Srila Prabhupada manipulated everything to not only get the deed and title to this land, but he got the rights, the perpetual rights to stay at Radha Damodar, he and his disciples forever. And he laid out the dimensions of all these buildings you see in the sand with his cane. Gurudas and I had a 10-foot piece of rope from our mosquito nets, and Prabhupada would walk. He would pace out this is where the main temple will be, and he would pace it all out, and then we would measure it and write it down on a piece of paper how many feet that was, and then he would mark the corner with his cane in the sand. This is where the corner will be. He laid out all these buildings on this property that day. And then he organized the foundation laying ceremony. He had somebody quickly get a plaque carved in marble. This is the foundation stone, the date, everything. And I think it was the morning of March 13th, 1972. There was nobody here, maybe a dozen of us, but some men had dug a big pit, and we had the foundation laying ceremony that day, that morning. And just to give you an idea of how difficult things were in Vrindavan in those days, that night, some gundas came and dug up our pit and poured trash in it, garbage, tore up all the markers, ISKCON signs. Well, Prabhupada was livid. He called the chief of police to his room and said, "You must stop this." Several devotees had been attacked in the streets. I was at the post office one day. There was a little post office down here somewhere, and you had an outdoor window, and I was paying the rupees for mailing some of Prabhupada's letters, and whack! Across my back, something hit me. And I reached around real quick, and I grabbed this bamboo stick, and there was a guy holding it, a smaller guy, so I pulled on it hard, and he fell down. And that started a riot. People started throwing bricks at me, and they ripped my dhoti off. And it was a free-for-all, 1 against maybe 10. And suddenly, all the people of Vrindavan around us came in and rescued me. They took these guys away, and they apologized, they wiped me off, they wrapped me up. I think that was kind of like a turning point. Residual anger of some of the Brijvasis against Srila Prabhupada and his movement disappeared from that day on. The people accepted Prabhupada. Anyway, so then on March 17th, this is just a few days later, 1 week later, we rushed to Juhu. And there Prabhupada laid the cornerstone on March 23rd for this giant Juhu temple. In those days, Juhu was like a swampland almost, just coconut groves, mosquitoes. There were over 100 people living on the property under fixed rents. You could never get them off. There was litigation going on with Mr. Nair. But Prabhupada, with his foresight, he made everyone in Bombay abandon those quarters and come and live out on Juhu. He said that occupation here is 9/10 of the law. So the devotees were camped out in these open fields, tents and huts, with cholera and typhoid, and so malaria. To see what Prabhupada's foresight, that he laid these 3 foundation stones, the 3 cornerstones for 3 properties in 3 weeks' time. So by the 1st of April 1972, Srila Prabhupada's work in India was booming. Just 1.5 years since our arrival in Bombay, with 20 untested youngsters who didn't know how to do anything. In less than 1 month, Srila Prabhupada has done the impossible. He's laid the cornerstones for his 3 main temples in India, despite all odds. Naxalite bandits, floods, cold, heat, lack of money, envious opponents, unsupportive godbrothers, caste Goswamis, a communist-leaning central government under martial law with strict rationing of construction materials, our shaky legal standing, and a handful of young but worn-out devotees. The lands we have acquired are so old, with so many contending proprietors, and so large, and in such vital locations. To even think of owning these properties is almost surreal. We are recent arrivals on Indian soil, with very little organization or social standing. And yet, despite these obstacles, Prabhupada's unrelenting desire to please Krishna has somehow prevailed. He did it. Seeing all this from the inside, typing his letters, making phone calls, huddled with him in late-night strategy sessions, I am in awe. This is Superman, beyond anything yet, and he is just getting started. I remember Prabhupada's purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi 7.61, where he comments on Lord Chaitanya's wondrous activities, so relevant now to what I am actually seeing. This is Prabhupada's purport. To draw the attention of common men, sometimes saintly persons, acharyas, and teachers exhibit extraordinary opulences. This is necessary to attract the attention of fools. But a saintly person should not misuse such power for personal sense gratification, like false saints who declare themselves to be God. Even a magician can exhibit extraordinary feats that are not understandable to common men, but this does not mean that the magician is God. It is a most sinful activity to attract attention by exhibiting mystic powers, and then to utilize this opportunity to declare oneself to be God. A real saintly person never declares himself to be God, but always places himself in the position of a servant of God. For a servant of God, there is no need to exhibit mystic powers, and he does not like to do so. But on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, a humble servant of God performs his activities in such a wonderful way that no common man can dare try to act like him. Yet a saintly person never takes credit for such actions, because he knows very well that when wonderful things are done on his behalf by the grace of the Supreme Lord, all credit goes to the master and not to the servant. So against all odds, our little army of Western devotees under Prabhupada's guidance, with our eyes opened by Vedic knowledge, we went on to raise Krishna's flag, and Srila Prabhupada's message stormed across and it captured the country of India. On April 1st, Srila Prabhupada left India for Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Japan, Hawaii, then Los Angeles, and all of these amazing stories are in this book also. That's pretty much volume 2, especially the India story. This is only part 1 of the India story. Volume 3 will have a lot more about India, early days of India in it. I think if there's one passage from my books which sums up everything, it might be this. Whenever Srila Prabhupada wanted me, he rang his little bell. Ding-a-ding-a-ding-ding-ding. His little bell tinkling even in sleep has become my wake-up call to happiness, transcending all other previous meanings of happiness. I cannot see enough of Prabhupada, the physical beauty of his face, especially his face, captures my eyes from morning till night, and I feast on his endless allure. He trusts me. He depends on me. How can I possibly deserve such mercy? He is in my care, I thought, forcing me to rise beyond all other considerations. I'm his audience. He seems to be energized by my laugh. He tries things out. He floats ideas. I'm his sounding board, his straight man. What do you think, Shyamasundar? He catches my glance from across the stage and raises an eyebrow, like, how am I doing? His smile and his laugh, especially his laugh, are all that I live for. So I've written this volume too for you, especially the devotees, so you can better understand the unimaginable foresight and the boundless energy and profound determination of Srila Prabhupada. How from almost nothing, Krishna consciousness was nearly extinct in India. How in such a short time he laid the groundwork and structure for this vast power and influence of ISKCON and Krishna consciousness in India today. These are stories of pure magic, adventure. This is a thriller novel. I wrote it like an adventure novel, and so you hold on to your seats when you read it. And as I passed through almost 5 years, 4 or 5 years of research and writing, I was more amazed each day how this superhuman, perfect person called Srila Prabhupada came among us and performed these magic deeds. And when you're in it day by day, you don't see it. Now I can see it from afar, 50 years later. Srila Prabhupada's cosmic, dazzling achievements, not just in India, but all over the world. And I'm kind of old myself now, almost 78. But I've become very optimistic, more optimistic than ever. Srila Prabhupada always said, I don't want millions of stars, I want just one moon. And as I look out over you guys today, I see so many moons rising to illuminate the world, to realize what Srila Prabhupada used to tell us every day. You must help me change the world. So this book is for you, dear friends. Please change the world. There's 500 pages, 180 photos in this book. It's been a vast labor of love. And I'll be signing some books over on the side here after the program. And just please note that all income from this book goes directly into producing and printing Volume 3 of Chasing Rhinos, which is already written, and I hope to bring to you in 2021. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhupada.